The debriefing chamber on outpost Drevok 7 smelled of recycled air, scorched wiring, and the faint musk of a dozen species crammed into a prefab structure never meant for extended occupation. Threx, senior tactical analyst of the Cathar Dominion's 7th Expeditionary Intelligence Corps, arranged his recording slates in precise alignment and waited. His 3 hearts beat a steady, anxious rhythm against his ribcage, though he would never admit that to himself. The human arrived precisely on time. Sergeant Mira Voss stepped through the pressured door without ceremony. She was shorter than Threx had expected. Humans always seemed taller in combat footage, their frames exaggerated by fire and movement. Here, under the flat glow panels, she looked almost unremarkable. Dull brown hair pulled back in a utilitarian knot, pale skin smudged with dust. Eyes the color of storm clouds that seemed to catalog everything in the room, including him, in a single sweep before settling into a practiced neutrality. Analyst Threx. Her voice was even, unaccented by translator modulation. "You wanted a debrief. Thank you for agreeing, Sergeant." Threx gestured to the seat across the narrow table. His own species, the Cathar, were tall and slender, built like reeds, their chitinous crests flushing with emotion they could never fully hide. He envied the human's apparent calm. "This is for operational record. I'll ask a series of standardized questions regarding the Drevok campaign, nothing unexpected." Mira sat down, hands resting loosely on the table. She didn't fidget. She didn't look away. She simply existed in the space with a stillness that felt, to Threx's finely tuned threat assessment instincts, deeply unnatural. He proceeded through the formalities. Unit designation, 22nd Marine Expeditionary Force, Reaper Division. Time in theater, 92 standard days. Mission objectives, hunt and eliminate the warlord Kavath's raider network, protect civilian settlements, provide close support for coalition forces. Mira answered each query with concise professionalism. No embellishment, no hesitation. Threx found himself increasingly unsettled by the absence of emotional leakage. Cathar soldiers debriefed with trembling crests, with vocal stress markers with the need to process. This human sat like a weapon at rest, and he realized he wasn't sure if she was safe or merely not yet triggered. He reached the section labeled Engagement Metrics and tapped his slate. "Sergeant, for the record, I need your confirmed combat elimination since your deployment to Drevok." Mira's gaze shifted slightly, focusing on a point just past his shoulder. The pause that followed was barely a heartbeat long, but Threx felt it in his crest tips. Then she did something that made his breathing stutter. She tilted her head. It was a small movement, almost curious, as if he'd asked a question with a hidden variable she needed to parse before answering. The angle of her skull changed by perhaps 15 degrees. Her expression remained placid, but the tilt itself seemed to carry a weight of something vast and patient, like a glacier deciding whether to calve. "This year," she said, "or just this planet?" The recording slates hummed in the sudden silence. Threx's crest flushed deep violet, the color of Cathar alarm. His fingers stopped moving over the interface. He replayed her words in his mind, convinced the translator had misfired. It had not. She waited, head still canted, perfectly motionless, waiting for clarification. Waiting, he understood, with a cold crawl down his spine, for him to specify the parameters of the slaughter he wished to quantify. Threx's voice cracked, a sound he hadn't produced since adolescence. He forced his crest to still. "The campaign on this planet, the Drevok operation." "Ah," Mira straightened her head, the gesture so minute it was almost imagined. "Just Drevok. 141 confirmed. 42 probable, pending drone verification." "The probable list includes an ammo depot strike that probably cooked off a dozen hostiles, but we can't confirm bodies, so I don't count them yet." She delivered this with the same tone she'd used to describe her unit designation. Numbers, data points, dispassionate arithmetic. Threx's training screamed at him to continue, to maintain professional composure, but a deeper, older part of his brain, the part that remembered what it was to be prey on ancient Cathar, was ringing alarm bells. 141, in 3 months. That was more than many Cathar soldiers achieved in a career, and she had to clarify whether he wanted the local count or the annual one. He opened his mouth to ask how many she'd eliminated this year when the outpost's klaxon ripped through the air, a bone-shaking wail of imminent danger. Proximity alert. Unidentified assault force breaching perimeter. All personnel to defensive stations. This is not a drill. Mira was already on her feet, the stillness replaced by a fluid economy of motion. She checked her sidearm with a practiced sweep of her hand and looked down at Threx, who remained frozen in his chair. "Debrief, over analyst," she said, and for the first time something flickered in those gray eyes, something that might have been anticipation. "Get to a bunker. I've got work to do." She moved toward the hatch, and Threx, watching her go, understood with sudden, terrible clarity that he had just received the most honest answer any human had ever given him. And he hadn't even heard the full count yet. Threx did not go to the bunker. He told himself it was duty. The intelligence corps needed first-hand observation of combat dynamics, especially with a human asset in play. The truth, which he would only admit much later, was that he needed to see. The numbers she had given him had opened a fissure in his worldview, and he could not seal it without understanding what they looked like in practice. The outpost's command center was a reinforced blister of composite armor clinging to the side of a basalt ridge. Screens lined the walls, fed by drone feeds and helmet cams. General Vethies, a battle-hardened Cathar with a notched crest and 3 prosthetic fingers, was barking orders to a cluster of harried staff officers. Threx slipped into an alcove and patched his personal slate into the tactical feed, isolating the channel tagged Voss, M, 22nd MEF. Outside, the world was on fire. Kavath's raiders had hit with coordinated ferocity, mortar barrages, armored skiffs sweeping the perimeter wire, waves of shock troops in scavenged battle plate charging through the smoke. Coalition defenders, a mix of Cathar regulars, Vree skirmishers, and a handful of human advisors, were falling back toward the central compound. The camera feeds showed chaos, muzzle flashes, tumbling bodies. And then there was Mira. Threx found her on a secondary feed, a drone-mounted optic tracking her signature. She had not fallen back. She had advanced into the breach, moving through the shattered outer wall and into the smoke-choked killing ground beyond. Her rifle, a standard-issue M42 pulse carbine, barked at measured intervals. Each report dropped a raider. It wasn't the speed of her shooting that horrified Threx, it was the economy. She never fired twice when once would do. She never ran when a walk conserved energy. She moved from cover to cover not like a soldier under fire but like a predator navigating familiar terrain, reading the chaos for patterns, exploiting every gap in the enemy's advance. He cross-referenced her biometrics. Her heart rate was 72 beats per minute. Her respiration was steady at 14 cycles. She was not fighting for her life, she was executing a process. "Sergeant Voss," crackled the command channel, "reports of a heavy assault element moving up the eastern approach. Do you have visual?" "Negative, command. Moving to high ground now." Threx watched her scramble up a collapsed watchtower, the metal groaning under her weight. From that perch she paused, head tilted again, that same eerie recalibration, and then spoke. "Confirmed. Siege crawler modified. Armor's too thick for small arms. It's going to breach the inner wall in 90 seconds if I don't intervene." General Vethies cut in. "All units concentrate anti-armor fire on the crawler, priority target." The response was immediate and grim. "Negative capability, sir. Launchers are dry. We're down to rifles and prayer." A heavy silence fell over the command channel. Threx saw the crawler on the drone feed now, a hulking beast of scrap steel and stolen shield generators, lumbering forward on 6 piston-driven legs, a rotary cannon mowing down everything in its path. The coalition line was collapsing. Evacuation wasn't possible. The outpost was minutes from being overrun. Mira's voice returned, calm as a frozen lake. "Command, I can kill it." "Sergeant, you are armed with a carbine and a combat knife. Stand down and withdraw to secondary positions." Request denied. Not defiant, simply factual. "I'm not asking permission. I'm telling you I can kill it. Keep everyone else clear of the eastern sector. Voss out." The channel went one way. Mira switched off her receiver, leaving command screaming into the void. Threx saw her slide down from the tower and vanish into the smoke, a single gray shape moving against the tide of retreating soldiers. His crest was burning violet now, his heart's hammering. 141 on this planet, 42 probables, and she was about to add a siege crawler. He keyed his slate to her biomonitor and settled in to watch. He could not look away. He didn't want to. This, he understood, was the answer to the question he hadn't finished asking. The annual tally, the lifetime tally, the ledger of death that this unremarkable woman carried in her head like a grocery list. The drone lost her in the smoke, but the biomonitor kept transmitting. Heart rate 74. Respiration 15. She was not running. She was hunting. Threx leaned forward, crest trembling, and for the first time in his career he prayed, not to the old Kethar gods he'd abandoned in his youth, but to whatever force might listen, that the human would survive long enough for him to ask her the rest of the question. The drone feed stabilized, its optics piercing the smoke with thermal overlay, and Threx watched Mira's heat signature detach from the debris field and sprint toward the crawler's flank. The machine was a moving fortress, its rotary cannon chewing through barricades with a sound like tearing sky. Coalition fire pattered off its shields like rain. Mira moved low and fast, a blur of warm amber against the cool blue of the battlefield. She didn't approach the crawler directly. Instead, she arced wide, circling toward a collapsed fuel depot where spilled promethium still burned in pools of liquid fire. The heat from the blaze would blind the crawler's thermal optics. She was using the environment as a weapon. Threx toggled his comm to the private frequency she had abandoned, hoping she'd reactivated her receiver. No response. She was still running dark, fully autonomous, operating on instinct and training that bordered on precognition. He watched her pause at the edge of the fire, unsling something from her back. A demolition charge, standard breaching kit, but she was stripping its casing, modifying it with the speed of long practice. Her hands moved with surgical precision, even as shrapnel from the crawler's cannon peppered the ground meters away. What is she doing? General Vethies had appeared at Threx's elbow, his scarred face tight with frustration. She's one soldier against a siege platform. She's not fighting it, Threx said, the realization crystallizing even as he spoke. She's dismantling it. Mira finished her modifications, a compact package now rigged with a remote detonator and a magnetic clamp. She sprinted along the crawler's blind side, using the rhythm of its cannon fire to time her movements. The drone feed flickered as she reached the machine's hind leg and slapped the charge onto the knee joint, the one unshielded gap in the armor. The explosion was sharp, surgical. The leg buckled, hydraulics spraying, and the crawler lurched, its rotation slowing as it compensated. Mira was already moving, climbing the listing hull with a blade clamped between her teeth, finding handholds in the seams of the armor. The drone feed lost her as she breached the top hatch and dropped inside. For a long, agonizing moment, there was only the sound of the crawler's cannon, still firing in desperate arcs. Then the cannon fell silent. A secondary explosion popped a panel on the machine's back. A third, then nothing. Threx's biomonitor flickered. Her heart rate had spiked to 110. Respiration 22. Elevated but still controlled, she was alive. The crawler shuddered and went dark, its shields collapsing. Cheers erupted in the command center, but Threx didn't join them. He was staring at the biomonitor, which had just registered a sudden drop in blood pressure. A trauma alert pulsed amber. Command Voss. Her voice was strained, breath thin. Crawler neutralized. I'm pinned. Main spar collapsed. Can't move my legs. The coordinates placed her inside the dead machine, buried under what sounded like several tons of steel. And on the drone feed, Threx could see enemy infantry converging on the wreckage, drawn by the explosion. General Vethies was already ordering a rescue team, but the nearest coalition squad was pinned down by residual fire from the raiders' second wave. They wouldn't reach her in time. Threx stood up. His crest was still flushed, but the fear had been replaced by something else, something that felt like resolve, hot and unfamiliar. I'm going, he said. Vethies stared at him as if he'd grown a second head. You're an analyst. You haven't fired a weapon since basic training. I know. Threx was already stripping his harness of non-essential gear. She saved the outpost. I'm not letting her die in a pile of scrap. He grabbed a sidearm from the weapons locker and looked at the two Vree skirmishers nearest the hatch. "You too, with me. Now." They blinked their large, dark eyes but did not argue. Something in his voice must have communicated the impossibility of refusal. Or perhaps they, too, had seen the numbers and understood that the human in the wreckage was worth more to this war than any of them could measure. Threx stepped into the smoke-choked corridor, weapon trembling in his grip, and began to move toward the killing field. Behind him, the biomonitor kept transmitting, a steady, fatting pulse. Her heart was still beating. He intended to keep it that way. The world outside the bunker was a canvas of wreckage and fire. Threx had studied war from climate-controlled offices, through sanitized reports and statistical models. He had never smelled it before, the acrid chemical bite of burning polymers, the thick copper of spilled blood, the underlying rot of ruptured sanitation systems. He nearly vomited. His crest clamped flat against his skull, a physiological response to overwhelming stimuli, but he forced his legs to keep moving. The two Vree, siblings named Tyrus and Lys, flanked him with the fluid grace of their arboreal species, their large eyes tracking threats he couldn't perceive. They passed bodies. Raider bodies. A dozen in the first 100 meters, each one dropped by precise fire. Mira's work. The spacing of the corpses told a story. She had engaged them in sequence, never letting them mass, funneling them into kill zones with the patience of someone for whom violence was a craft. The siege crawler loomed ahead, a dead metal mountain leaking smoke from a dozen wounds. Enemy shouts echoed from the far side of the wreck, but Threx couldn't see any movement near the hull. He led the Vree toward the crawler's underside, where a torn access panel offered a narrow route inside. "Hold this position," he told the Vree, and then before he could lose his nerve, he squeezed into the darkness. Inside, the crawler was a tomb. Emergency lights flickered, casting long shadows across crushed consoles and sprawled bodies. The crew, killed by the secondary explosions Mira had triggered. Threx followed the sound of shallow breathing, crawling over debris until he found her. She was pinned beneath a collapsed roof spar, a massive beam of alloyed steel that had fallen across her lower body. Her legs were not visible, they were buried under the beam in a tangle of severed cables. Blood pooled beneath her, dark and spreading, but her eyes were open and her sidearm was in her hand, aimed steadily at his chest. "Analyst," she said and lowered the weapon. "Didn't expect you. I surprised myself." Threx knelt beside her, assessing the situation with a tactical eye that felt entirely inadequate. The beam was too heavy to lift without hydraulic assistance. She was losing blood. Enemy contacts were minutes away at most. "We need to get you out." "No, you need to get you out." Mira's voice was a rasp, but the calm in it remained. "I'm dead weight. Extraction's not viable, but I triggered a distress beacon before the hatch collapsed." Threx frowned. "The coalition frequencies are jammed." "No one heard your beacon." "Not a coalition beacon." She coughed and blood flecked her lips. "Human channel, priority 1. It punches through jamming, just takes a while to propagate." "What does priority 1 mean?" Mira's lips curved into something that might have been a smile if smiles could carry that much weight. "It means the Reapers are coming. The 22nd Sister Battalion. They were in reserve on the Katabatic, holding orbit beyond the moon. My beacon tells them a Reaper is down and alive." "They'll come." Threx's crest pulsed. "How long?" "Any minute now." She shifted and her face tightened with pain. "You should be somewhere else when they arrive. Reaper protocol on a priority 1 extraction is aggressive." "Define aggressive." She looked at him, and in the flickering light her eyes seemed to hold a depth of experience that made his 3 decades of life feel like a child's afternoon. "They will kill everything on this battlefield that isn't wearing a human IFF tag. No surrender. No negotiation. The Raiders, whatever's left of them, will be erased. And if your people are still in the open, they might get caught in the sweep. Get them inside. Now." Threx should have left. Every instinct, every calculation of survival demanded he retreat and relay her warning, but he didn't move. He was looking at the blood spreading beneath her, at the impossible weight crushing her legs, and at the weapon still steady in her grip. "How many?" he asked. "What?" "This year. You said Drevok was 141. How many this year?" Mira blinked. Something flickered across her face, surprise maybe, or a grim appreciation for his persistence. 416 confirmed across 3 planets, doesn't count the probables. And total in your career. She was quiet for a moment. The distant crack of gunfire echoed through the hull. That's not a number I share, analyst. Some things aren't for reports. Threx nodded slowly. He understood, or thought he did. She was not a monster. She was a ledger keeper, and the ledger was too heavy to read aloud. I'm staying. Someone needs to stabilize you until the Reapers arrive. Mira studied him, that same head-tilted evaluation she'd given in the debriefing room. Then she reached up with her free hand and detached something from her collar, a small med kit injector. Stick this in my thigh near the artery. It'll slow the bleeding. Then get your rifle ready. The raiders are going to try to recover their crawler and we're in their way. Threx took the injector. His hands were trembling, but he did what she asked. Outside, the Vree called a warning, enemy contacts inbound. The night was about to get much worse, and somewhere above the clouds something was descending. The first raider through the breach died before Threx could even raise his sidearm. Mira's pistol cracked twice, the shots impossibly precise for a woman pinned under half a ton of steel, and the figure crumpled backward into the smoke. She ejected the spent magazine and slammed a fresh one into place with a motion that looked automatic. They'll send more, she said. That one was a scout. Main body'll be right behind him. Threx positioned himself behind a collapsed console, the sidearm feeling clumsy in his grip. The Vree had taken cover outside, their needle rifles hissing as they engaged targets approaching from the wreckage field. He could hear the raiders shouting in their guttural trade language, coordinating a breach of the crawler's interior. "Why did you come back?" Mira asked. Her voice was quieter now, the stimulant from the injector visibly working. The blood flow had slowed, but her skin was waxen. "You're an intelligence analyst. This isn't your job." Threx's crest flushed. "You gave me an answer that I couldn't stop thinking about. I wasn't finished with the question." A burst of static crackled from her discarded helmet and a voice cut through, human female, cold as vacuum. "Reaper actual to downed asset Voss. We have your beacon. ETA 90 seconds. Mark your position with infrared strobe. Any non-human IFF in your immediate vicinity." Mira grabbed the helmet and keyed the transmit. "Voss here. I've got 3 friendly non-humans in my defensive perimeter. Cathar analyst, 2 Vree skirmishers. They're with me. Repeat, they are friendly." A pause. "Then understood, Voss. Friendlies are to remain stationary and transmit IFF codes now. Anyone moving outside your perimeter in 60 seconds is a target. No exceptions." Threx fumbled with his slate, broadcasting his coalition identifier, and shouted for the Vree to do the same. Outside, the raiders were getting closer. He could hear their boots scraping over rubble, their shouts turning to howls of anticipated slaughter. 50 seconds, Mira said. "Get behind something solid." "This is going to be close." Threx wedged himself deeper behind the console. "What's going to happen?" Mira looked at him, and for the first time since he'd met her, there was something like warmth in her expression. It was faint, buried under pain and exhaustion, but it was there. "You're about to see why my people don't worry much about kill counts. Counting implies an end. We don't stop." The sky split open. Threx didn't see the Katabatic itself. The frigate was too high, a shadow against the stars, but he saw its payload. Drop pods streaked down through the smoke like falling stars, slamming into the ground in a perfect ring around the crawler. The impacts shook the earth, knocking raiders off their feet, throwing up gouts of dirt and fire. Hatches blew open. Figures emerged. The Reapers were not like Mira. She was, he understood now, their peacetime face. The version that could sit in a debriefing room and recite numbers with detached professionalism. These were the wartime face. They wore full combat exoskeletons, matte black armor that drank light, helmets with blank visors that gave no hint of the humans inside. They moved with a synchronized precision that made Mira's earlier efficiency look like a warm-up exercise. The lead Reaper raised a gauntlet and made a single gesture. The squad split, flowing outward into the smoke, and the killing began. Threx watched through the crawler's torn hull as the raider force, 40-50 soldiers, some of them still rallying for the assault on the crawler, was dismantled in seconds. The Reapers didn't shout. They didn't roar battle cries. They communicated with hand signals and sub-vocalized commands, a silent tide of violence that swept through the raiders like a scythe through dry grain. Pulse rifles snapped. Blades flashed. Bodies dropped. One raider, an officer by his scarred armor, tried to surrender, threw down his weapon, raised his hands, screamed for mercy in a voice that cracked with terror. The Reaper in front of him didn't slow, didn't even pause. The blade took him cleanly, and the Reaper stepped over the body without looking down. 60 seconds after the pods landed, the battlefield was silent. Threx's crest was pressed so flat against his skull he could feel the ache in the bone. His heartbeats were a frantic triplet. Beside him, Mira exhaled slowly. "Told you," she murmured. A Reaper appeared at the hull breach, larger than the others, a red chevron on the chest plate, the squad leader. "Sergeant Voss, medevac is inbound, we'll cut you out." The helmet turned toward Threx, and he felt the weight of the gaze behind that blank visor. "You the Cathar who came for her?" "Yes," Threx managed. "I am." The Reaper held his stare for a long moment. Then the helmet dipped in a single nod. "Noted, stay with her. She doesn't like strangers when she's bleeding." The extraction took 12 minutes. Hydraulic spreaders peeled the beam off Mira's legs, and a human medic, her armor marked with a red spiral, worked with alarming speed, stabilizing fractures, transfusing synthetic blood, murmuring to Mira in a dialect Threx's translator couldn't parse. They loaded her onto a grav stretcher and moved her toward the waiting evac shuttle. Threx followed, because he didn't know what else to do. The Vree fell in beside him, their dark eyes wide. None of them spoke. At the shuttle ramp, the Reaper squad leader stopped him. "You're the analyst who was debriefing her." "Yes. She told you her count, part of it." The Reaper was quiet for a moment. Then, "She's got the highest count in the battalion. 538 confirmed career kills. She knows the number down to the last digit because she carries every single one. That's the part the reports don't say. She doesn't forget. She doesn't get to forget." The helmet tilted, a gesture that reminded Threx viscerally of Mira. "You asked her. Now you know. Don't waste that knowledge." The shuttle lifted off, carrying Mira toward the catabatic. Threx stood in the smoldering silence of the battlefield, surrounded by the dead, and understood that his report to the Dominion would need to be very, very carefully worded. The catabatic's medical bay was cleaner than anything Threx had ever seen. The Cathar Dominion built functional ships, serviceable, durable, unapologetically industrial. The human frigate was different. The surfaces gleamed with a sterile, almost aggressive cleanliness. The air cycled with a soft hum that barely registered in his crest receptors. Everything was designed to be ignored, to fade into the background so the humans aboard could focus entirely on their tasks. He had been summoned, but not yet permitted to see Mira. For 2 hours, he sat in a waiting alcove, watching medical personnel move past with quiet efficiency. They paid him minimal attention, which he appreciated. His crest was still cycling through confused color patterns he couldn't control, and he didn't want to explain himself to strangers. General Vethies had called twice. The first time to reprimand him for leaving the command center. The second time, after the Reaper's assault footage had been reviewed, to cancel the reprimand and request, with uncharacteristic hesitation, a full briefing on what exactly Threx had witnessed. Threx had promised a comprehensive report and disconnected before the trembling in his voice could become audible. The door to the recovery ward opened, and a human medic with close-cropped white hair and tired eyes approached. "Analyst Threx, Sergeant Voss is awake and asking for you. 10 minutes. She needs rest, so don't push." He nodded and followed her inside. Mira was propped up on a bed that adjusted itself silently to accommodate her injuries. Both legs were encased in regenerative sleeves, translucent membranes filled with a pale blue fluid that pulsed gently. Her torso was wrapped in compression bandages, but her arms were free, and her storm cloud eyes were alert, tracking him as he entered. "You made it," she said. "Good. I'd have been annoyed if you got shot after all that." "I had excellent motivation not to get shot." Threx pulled a stool closer to the bed and sat down, his crest settling into a neutral gray. "How are your legs? They'll grow back." She said it as if regrowing limbs was a routine inconvenience. "The medics say 6 weeks in the sleeves, then rehab. I've had worse." Threx decided not to ask what worse entailed. "You asked to see me." Myra looked down at her hands, which were resting on a datapad. The screen was dark, but he caught a glimpse of images before it powered off. Faces, human faces, arranged in a grid. I wanted to thank you for coming back. That's not something people do for Reapers. We're the ones who go into the dark alone. Nobody comes after us. I didn't come after a Reaper, Threx said. I came after a soldier who had just saved my entire outpost. The distinction seemed important. Something shifted in her expression. The professional mask, which he had assumed was permanent, developed a hairline crack. Beneath it, he glimpsed exhaustion so deep it looked geological, layered and ancient and compressed under unimaginable pressure. You wanted to know the rest of the numbers, she said. The total. My battalion commander told you, didn't she? 538. That was last week. Add the crawler crew and the infantry I dropped before you found me. 551. She let the number hang in the air. 29 years old by Earth standard. I've been in the Corps for 8 years. Do the math. He didn't need to. The arithmetic was ugly. That's not a kill count, he said slowly. That's a career body count, a one-woman war. That's what the Dominion will write in their reports, isn't it? Human soldiers are lethal, recruit with caution, deploy with oversight. Her voice carried a bitter edge. They always miss the point. What is the point then? Myra tapped the datapad and the screen illuminated. The grid of faces resolved, 31 humans, young, stern, grinning, solemn. A unit photo taken somewhere dusty and sun-bleached. My first squad, the 14th Marine Expeditionary Ghost Company. We were deployed to the Canopus front 5 years ago. We got caught in an ambush. I was the only survivor. Threx's crest dimmed to a deep, mournful blue. I am sorry. 31 people I trained with, ate with, slept next to in trenches. 31 names I still recite every morning before I check my gear. And after Canopus, I got rotated into the Reaper program. Not because I was angry, because I couldn't stop seeing their faces. The Reapers taught me how to make sure what happened to them didn't happen to anyone else under my watch. She looked at him and the crack in the mask widened. 551 kills, and I still couldn't save them. I just added more names to someone else's memorial wall. Threx sat motionless. Everything he had assumed about humanity's warrior caste, that they were bred for aggression, that they gloried in combat, that the kill count was a badge of honor, crumbled around him. He had misread the data. The numbers were not trophies, they were a penance. You fight, he said, because you can't forget. I fight because forgetting would mean they died for nothing. Myra powered off the datapad and set it aside. The Dominion sees a weapon. The Raiders saw a monster. But you. You came back when you didn't have to. So I'm asking you, Analyst Threx, to write your report honestly, not about how many I've killed, about why I'm still out there killing. And why is that? She tilted her head, that same small recalibration, but this time he saw something else in it, a gesture not of menace, but of a person finding the right words to bridge an impossible gap. Because someone has to carry the weight, and humans are very, very good at carrying things that would break anyone else. Threx sat with that for a long moment. The hum of the medical bay filled the silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was steadier than he'd expected. My report will recommend a full strategic alliance, not because your people are dangerous, though they are, but because the galaxy needs allies who understand that strength isn't measured in kills. It's measured in what you're willing to carry for the people beside you. Myra nodded once, a small, exhausted gesture. Good. Then maybe this one was worth it. She closed her eyes and Threx knew the conversation was over. He rose, hesitated, and then spoke one final time. Sergeant Voss, the number on Drevok, 141, you said you don't count the probables. Why not? Without opening her eyes, she answered. Because I need to be sure every name has weight. I don't carry ghosts I can't confirm. Threx walked out of the medical bay, his crest a steady, resolved gray. He had his answer, all of it. And it was so much heavier than he had ever imagined. 6 months later, Threx stood before the Cathar Dominion's High Strategic Council in the capital city of Cradlenest and delivered his report. The chamber was vast, a semicircle of tiered seats occupied by the crested elders of a dozen major houses, their colors shifting in slow patterns of skepticism and intrigue. Behind Threx, a massive holographic display showed the key findings of the Joint Species Combat Effectiveness Study, which he had authored. He had titled it On the Subject of Human Military Integration, beyond lethality metrics. The Council had expected casualty ratios, weapons assessments, tactical recommendations. They were about to receive something else entirely. "Respected elders," Threx began, his voice amplified by the chamber's acoustics, "this report will not tell you how many enemies a human soldier can kill. That number is publicly available in every after-action review and body count ledger from the Drevok campaign. If you wish to know the arithmetic, consult the appendices. I am here to discuss what the numbers mean." He tapped his slate, and the hologram shifted to show Mira's face, not the gaunt, bloodied visage from the crawler wreckage, but a formal portrait from the Marine Corps database. Neutral expression, eyes that carried an unreadable weight. Sergeant Mira Voss, 22nd Marine Expeditionary Force. At the time of my debrief, her confirmed career eliminations totaled 551. She is not the highest count human soldier in active service. She is not an anomaly. She is, by human standards, typical of their special operations cadre. That fact alone should terrify you. A ripple of color passed through the Council, murmurs stirring. But terror is the wrong response. During the Drevok engagement, I witnessed Sergeant Voss neutralize a siege crawler single-handedly, knowing it would likely cost her life. I watched her hold a defensive position while critically injured, protecting non-human soldiers who had no tactical utility to her. And I observed a human rescue force deploy overwhelming lethal power, not to conquer, but to retrieve one of their own whom they refused to abandon. He paused, letting the silence gather. The Dominion has spent decades studying humanity as a potential threat. We have modeled their military expansion, their technological acceleration, their alarming capacity for innovation under pressure. We have prepared for the day they might turn against us. This report argues that such preparation is not only unnecessary, it is strategically self-defeating. An elder from House Torvek, whose crest bore the notches of a veteran commander, leaned forward. "Analyst Threx, you are suggesting we align ourselves with a species that can produce soldiers like this Voss. That we invite these, Reapers, into our fleets, our garrisons, our home systems. With respect, Elder, they are already here." Threx gestured to the hologram, which shifted to show the joint fleet formations currently patrolling the Cathar border. "Human frigates have been part of our defensive screen for 18 months. Human ground advisors have trained 3 of our shock battalions. And in that time, not a single incident of human aggression against coalition personnel has been recorded. Not one. They are dangerous, yes, but they are dangerous on our behalf." He switched the display to the grid of faces, Ghost Company, Mira's lost squad. 31 humans who had died on a front the Dominion barely remembered. This is why they fight. This is the context our tactical models have been missing. Humans form bonds with their squad mates that are, by our psychological metrics, irrational. They will endure catastrophic losses, physical and psychological, to protect those bonds. They will carry the memory of their dead for decades, using that weight as fuel. When Sergeant Voss gave me her numbers, she did so without pride, without shame, simply as a ledger of debts she is still paying. Threx's crest shifted to a pale silver, the Cathar color of solemn truth. "We have been asking the wrong question. We ask how many they kill. We should be asking what they are willing to die for, and what they are willing to live for. The answer, elders, is us, if we let them." The council chamber fell into a profound stillness. Threx could see the recalibration happening behind their eyes, the same shift he had experienced in Mira's debriefing room. The numbers were terrifying, but the context was transformative. House Torvek's elder spoke again, slowly. "You are recommending a full military alliance. I am recommending more than that. I am recommending we stop treating humans as a resource to be managed and start treating them as partners to be trusted. Their strength is not their lethality. It is their refusal to let go of what they love. If we are counted among those things, we will never have a more formidable ally. If we push them away out of fear, we will have made a strategic error from which the Dominion may never recover." The vote took 3 hours. Threx waited in an anteroom, his crest cycling through nervous patterns he was too exhausted to control. When the summons came, He returned to the chamber and received the council's decision with a composure he did not feel. The alliance was ratified, unanimously. Later that evening, Threx sat alone in his quarters aboard the diplomatic cruiser that would carry him back to the frontier. His slate was open to a personal message, composed but unsent. It was addressed to Sergeant Mira Voss, currently completing her rehabilitation at a human medical facility on Proxima Station. He had written and rewritten it 17 times. The final version read simply, "Sergeant Voss, the Dominion has approved the alliance. Your testimony and your actions on Drevok were instrumental. I thought you should know that when I presented your kill count to the council, I also showed them the photograph of Ghost Company. I told them about the weight you carry. They understood, I think, or at least they're trying to. If you are ever in Cradle Nest, I would like to finish our debrief. I still have questions." Not about the numbers, about the faces. With respect, Threxy sent the message before he could second-guess himself, then sat back and stared at the bulkhead. The ship hummed around him, a steady, living sound. Somewhere in the vast dark between stars, a human frigate was running patrol, its crew going about their duties with the quiet competence of people who understood exactly what they were protecting. He thought about Myra, tilted head and tired eyes, and the way she had said "this year or just this planet." The words had terrified him then. They still did in a way, but now they meant something different. They meant that someone was keeping count, someone was remembering, someone was carrying the weight so that others wouldn't have to, and that, Threx had decided, was not a threat. It was a promise. The stars slid past the viewport, cold and distant and full of unknown dangers. Threx watched them, and for the first time in his career, he felt something that might have been hope.